Hey guys, welcome back to our Writing Freedom Read Aloud. I'm going to go ahead and start us off by reading our Chapter 9 questions for your comprehension questions that are posted in your Google Classroom. So make sure as soon as we're done reading together that you go ahead and head on to your questions. It's a really great idea to go ahead and have them open in another tab while we're reading, and some people find that it's easier to maybe go ahead and fill in their answers or fill in a rough answer and then go back and make it nice in a nice, pretty sentence. So do whatever works best for you guys. Okay, your questions for Chapter 9. Describe how Charlotte became a hero. Number 2, describe how Charlotte got the land that she wanted. Spoiler alert. Number 3, how has Hayward changed? How has he stayed the same? I'm so glad we're going to get to see Hayward in this chapter. All right, guys, let's go ahead and tune in. It's a kind of a long chapter, so it will probably end up being in 2 videos because each video that I post can only be 15 minutes. So let's see. The passengers' tongues were wagging long after the coach arrived at its destination. News of how the one-eyed driver saved the lives of those people spread like warm honey. For years after that, Charlotte caused all the storms of commotion every time she drove into town. Folks started tossing $3 gold pieces in the road to see if she would hit them with the wheels of the stagecoach. Seems that if a one-eyed driver could run over your coin, you would have good luck. Grown men would stand on the side of the road and wait for the stage to come through, with children running behind the stage to collect the coins and delivered them like offerings to a hero. And folks just gathered around to hear what One-Eyed Charlie had to say, though as usual it wasn't much. "Here, Charlie, you hit this one," said one little girl, giggling. "My pockets are already jangling," Charlotte said. "Papa says you're not scared of anything," said another. "Well, that's not true. I'm as scared as you are," said Charlotte. "I just do what I have to do." "What you gonna buy with all this money?" asked a small boy. Charlotte said, "I'm gonna buy something I've wanted ever since I was knee-high." So that's a reference to being really little. "A new horse?" said the boy. "Nope," said Charlotte. A new gun?" "Nah, I got one already, and I don't use it except to scare off bandits," said Charlotte. "It's something much better than both of them things." Charlotte was driving a new route from San Juan Bautista to Santa Cruz. She had moved from Sacramento and was sleeping in a barn loft again, but this time at a wait station where the stage drivers changed horses. Frank and James had promised her that it was a beautiful run. They were right. It was the kind of country that Charlotte loved. Toward the east, mountains, and toward the west, rolling hills that sometimes met the ocean. It was greener than Sacramento, and Charlotte even liked the fog that made the mornings last longer. But the way station was another story. Stage drivers changed horses every 12 miles, and most of the way stations were pitiful, including this one. It was dirty, run down, and the stable for 15 or so horses. If the passengers had to spend the night, they slept in a hut on the dirt floor. The food was mostly rancid bacon, mustard greens, and corn doggers, and sandy coffee. Now that she had the money, Charlotte couldn't wait to move, couldn't wait to buy her own place. One afternoon, while riding a horse towards Watsonville to mail a letter to Hayward, she saw a for sale sign in a pasture. She turned her horse down the road, and at the end of it there was a cabin with a few corrals. A sturdy, gray-haired woman came out of a rustic chicken coop with a basket of eggs in her arm, and as she walked, she held herself tall. "You hear about the property?" "Yes, ma'am," said Charlotte. "The owners don't live here anymore. I'm Margaret. I got the small house farther down the main road. I feed the chickens and I collect the eggs." "Do you know anything about the land?" asked Charlotte. "Well, best I know is it's 25 acres, and there's an apple orchard that needs tending real bad, 40 laying hens, front pasture runs all the way to the main road to town." Charlotte looked out toward the main road. That acreage would make a perfect way station. She knew that if she could get Ebenezer out here, he'd do a finer job than anyone managing it. Charlotte turned her attention back to the woman. Any other neighbors? I'm the closest, said Margaret, but it don't look like that for long. I was widowed last year, and my husband still owed money on the mortgage. I've been trying to keep up the payments. I sell the eggs in town just to get by, but the bank is threatening to foreclose me. Well, where are you going to move? Asked Charlotte. Well, that's my quandary, she said, looking out over the land. I lived here most of my days, but I don't have family. I don't want to leave, but I can't pay the bank. Well, they need their money. For an instant, her face clouded over, and her warm brown eyes reflected the sadness. If you're looking for another bit of land, I guess the bank would probably sell you mine in a hurry, said Margaret. Well, I'll be on my way. Good luck, young man. And she turned and walked down the road. Charlotte surveyed the property. She had known that the moment that she came down the lane that it was the land that she had been looking for. She saved a substantial amount of money. She could afford it. As she rode to the bank to inquire, though, instead of thinking about the 25 acres and the home that she could finally own, she could not get her mind off Margaret and the home that she stood to lose. Here's a big scene change here. After a few days later, Charlotte offered $600 in gold coin for the property. The bank president handed Charlotte a pen and she signed the papers. You just bought a fair portion of what is called Rancho Corralitos, said the president. Thank you, said Charlotte. Tell me about the land to the west, the small parcel where the widow lives. Well, the wife can't pay it, so we're foreclosing. She hasn't even gotten a cent. Hate to do it, but the woman can't pay after all. Business is business. Charlotte nodded. The bank president grabbed Charlotte's hand and pumped it up and down. Congratulations, it's been a pleasure, Mr. Parkhurst. It all happened so fast that afterward, as Charlotte stood on the bank steps smiling, she wondered if it had all been a dream. She couldn't resist riding back to see the place again. It was late afternoon, and as she turned down the road, her road, the sky clouded when the early evening mist settled in the air. When she reached the hillock, she stopped and looked over her land. The west wind blew a breeze off the Pacific. The pasture grass swayed in one continuous rolling wave. Pinkish dots showed the orchard trees as the apples ripened. Charlotte's heart filled at the sight of it. I did it, she thought. I did it. She saw herself picking the apples and raising horses, and she pictured Hayward right alongside her, training the horses to be ridden just like they had imagined all those years ago at the orphanage. But as proud as she was that she had done what she had set out to do, there was a part of her that felt like something was missing. After all, this had been Hay's dream too. That night she would write to Ebenezer and tell him that if he had any sense, he should come. She needed him to start the way station. Besides, she missed him, and she would write to Hayward and tell him the news. But it had been so many months since she had heard from him. Had something happened to him? Was his heart settled in a new place and he didn't want to tell her? Mail being what it was, it could take a month for a letter to travel east and a month to get an answer back. But Charlotte went to the post office every few days. When she heard from Ebenezer, Charlotte grinned ear to ear and let out a loud whoop. He was coming for a visit in the spring, and if he liked it, he was going to stay. She couldn't wait to see him again. Maybe by then she'd have some horses. Charlotte moved into the house, and since business was business, she had gone back to the bank president and purchased Margaret's small parcel of land to the west. Then she and Margaret had struck an agreement. Margaret would tend to the chickens and the eggs and did some cooking, and that was enough rent for Charlotte. Another 4 months passed. The chickens were well cared for, and there were plenty of fresh eggs to sell. Margaret made applesauce, apple butter, and preserves. Charlotte hoped Ebenezer liked apples because he would be eating them every which way. Charlotte rode home one evening, tired and dusty. She was familiar with every shadow of her property, but in the warning light, she could tell that something was wrong. She stared hard into the dim light with her good eye to figure out what it was. In the front pasture there was something different, something wooden. A box? Who would have left a wooden box on the front of her pasture? Sorry guys, I gotta check the time real quick. After the first move-in, she had found a burlap sack tossed down her road, and it was a litter of kittens that someone had abandoned. She took them in and nursed all of them, and now they ran all over the orchard. Had someone tried to leave another poor animal on her property, this time in a wooden box? As she rode closer, she realized that it wasn't a wooden box at all, but it was a sign. Someone had pounded a wooden sign in the front of her pasture and had painted some words on the front. Puzzled, she walked her horse through the tall pasture grass so that she could get a good look of it. Her heart leaped out of sight. She turned the horse and galloped toward the cabin. Painted on the sign were the words, "Private Property." Sitting on the front porch playing with an armful of kittens was a lanky, broad-shouldered, red-haired man with the biggest ears that Charlotte had ever seen. "Hayward!" She tied her horse and bounded up on the porch and hugged him all long and hard. "Hey, you're taller than me and twice as strong. I don't think I can stand it," said Charlotte. "It's about time. I could be better than you at something," he said, laughing. They studied each other. Hay had never seen Charlotte's eye patch before, and she was suddenly embarrassed. I'm plumb blind in that eye," she said. "You don't look much different," Hay said, "but you would scare William to death." They both laughed. Memories of the orphanage flooded over Charlotte. When Hay reached for the runaway kittens, Charlotte noticed a thin leather tied around his wrist. "You still got that leather bracelet," she said, and held out her arm next to his to compare. Both leather bands were soft and rolled from years of wear. "Remember that day, Charlotte?" "As well as you," she said, and they hugged again. So many years had passed between them. They were older, but everything about them seemed familiar. I missed you, Charlotte." "Me too, Hay." Charlotte had been so hungry to see him that all she could do was stare. She started to reach up and ruffle her hair, but when she hesitated, an awkward silence came over them. He finally said, "Well, I made it to California." And when she remembered her manners, she said, "Sit down and tell me what you've been doing." "Well, after my folks moved to Missouri, I rode for the Pony Express. But that didn't last long, about a year and a half. The transcontinental telegraph and the railroad took its place real quick. After that, I needed to work, so I moved cattle for a while, and I've been stock tendering some." He grinned. "Been saving money for California." Charlotte smiled. It was the same old chattering anyway, as eager as ever to tell everything. She relaxed, and nothing ever changed. "Now my folks want to move west, so when I got the chance to ride out with a wagon train, I knew I had to come, to learn the roads, and to see you. And that's where I've been all these months, on the wagon train. I saved every one of your letters. I can't believe it's you, Charlotte." "I know it's hard to believe, but I'm the same old Charlotte, fighting and scrappy in my way." "You still driving?" he asked. "Some. I aim to make my property the way station. Change the teams when they come through, and I'll take care of the horses and buy a few things of my own with the money I bring in. Ebenezer's coming for a visit, and I'm going to do my best to get him to stay. For all my traveling around, I didn't think I wanted to stay put, but for some reason, I'm as contented as my new mare." "You got a new mare? Will she foal in the spring?" he asked. "Yep," she said. He nodded his head and he grinned. "I guess we're as far away from the orphanage as we'll ever get." "What do you hear about the orphanage?" "Well, I saw some of the boys now and then. Last I heard, Millshark was still there and Miss Boyle's gone. I heard William got adopted the year after me by an elderly couple who needed someone to work on their farm. I guess the man loved his animals and William beat his prize mare, so they sent him back. First boy in years that got unadopted. Don't that figure? You heard about Vern?" "He passed on." "No," said Charlotte quietly. "I didn't know that, but for some reason I suspected it. He was getting old in years when we were there, and I won't ever be able to forget him for all the things that he's done for me." Charlotte got teary-eyed and didn't even try to hide it. She pulled out her kerchief and wiped her eyes. Hayward looked in the cabin. "You've done good, Charlotte. You done real good."